The candles had burned down to trembling stubs across Hargrove Manor, their light pooling like spilled honey over the marble floor. And Owen Hale stood motionless at the center of the ballroom, a single father in a borrowed jacket, 2 sizes too clean, while the laughter of 300 strangers broke over him in slow, glittering waves. Brett Calloway's voice sliced through the jazz like a thrown knife. "A match made in heaven. 2 nobodies nobody wants." A manicured finger swung toward Serena Whitfield, the woman Charleston whispered about as the daughter of a failure. 6-year-old Clara pressed her teddy bear against her ribs until the seams sighed. She did not cry. She had already learned that tears only sharpened the laughter. Owen did not run. He did not shout. He reached instead for an empty chair and pulled it out for her. The story did not begin with the chair. It began 2 hours earlier, when Owen Hale parked his weathered Ford pickup 3 blocks from Hargrove Manor and sat for a long moment with his hands on the wheel. The invitation lay on the dashboard, the gold edge already softened from being read too many times. Carolina Builders Charity Gala, Hargrove Manor Hotel, black tie encouraged. The black tie part had cost him a phone call to his cousin Walter, who had loaned him a dinner jacket from his own wedding 15 years earlier. The shoulders fit. The sleeves did not. Owen had pushed them up at the cuffs and told himself nobody would be looking at him long enough to notice. Beside him, Clara sat in the booster seat with her teddy bear tucked beneath her chin. She was 6 years old and small for her age, and she had insisted on the navy dress with the white collar, the one her father had ironed at 4 in the morning, while the kitchen radio murmured news he was not really listening to. "Daddy," she said, "do I have to talk to anyone? Only if you want a sugar." "What if I don't want to?" "Then you stand next to me, you eat the little crackers, and we go home when the music gets slow." She nodded the small, certain nod of a child who has decided the rules. He had not wanted to come. The invitation had arrived because his crew had welded the new staircase rails inside the hotel 3 months earlier, and the outgoing manager had insisted that the men who did the work be on the guest list at least once. Owen had folded the card into his shirt pocket and meant to throw it out by week's end. He had not. Something about the gold edge had felt like a small dare, and the babysitter had canceled. And so here he was. The lobby of Hargrove Manor smelled of beeswax and old wood of crystal, cleaned with vinegar and roses cut that morning. The chandelier above the grand staircase had been lit in 1912 and had not, according to the brass plaque beneath it, gone dark for more than an evening at a time since. Owen lifted Clara off her feet at the threshold so she could see, and her small mouth opened into a soundless, "Oh, it's like inside a music box," she whispered. "It is." He set her down. He did not know yet that by the end of the night, his name would be the one this entire room remembered. At a table near the kitchen door, Serena Whitfield had already been seated for 37 minutes. She had chosen that table on purpose, the one closest to the swinging service door, the one the catering staff brushed past, most often the one no one with any social standing would willingly accept. The young hostess who had not recognized her blinked twice and asked if she was sure. Serena had said yes, this one, thank you. She wore a dress the color of charcoal, no jewelry except a thin steel watch on her left wrist, her hair pulled back into a low knot that had taken her 30 seconds to make. She did not want to be looked at. She had not come to be looked at. She had come because that very morning, the final signatures on the acquisition had dried, and she wanted to sit one time inside the building she now owned, without anyone calling her Miss Whitfield. She wanted to see what people did when they thought no one important was watching. The right side of her body still carried the rain of that night 4 years earlier, wet asphalt headlights swinging across the median the moment her hip had refused to obey her. The graceful walk of the girl. She had once been the one who used to descend the staircase of this very hotel at her father's New Year's parties, had been buried somewhere in the hospital ward, where she had lain for 11 weeks. What had risen in its place walked carefully and counted each step like a coin she could not afford to drop. Most of Charleston had stopped speaking her name aloud after her father's company collapsed. Whitfield Hospitality, the name on the napkins of half the seafood restaurants from Beaufort to Myrtle Beach, gone in 18 months, eaten by a partner who turned out to be neither. Her father had died in his armchair with a tax document still in his hand. Her mother had stopped recognizing the rooms of their own home not long after. Serena had taken a job folding sheets in the basement laundry of this very hotel for 2 years, before her uncle's old attorney called her about a trust nobody had told her existed, and the slow, patient climb back had begun. 5 years and 1 private equity partner. Later, she was the principal of Whitfield Hospitality Group, the new entity that had acquired Hargrove Manor that morning. The deal had been routed through a Delaware shell company. The sale had not yet been announced. Only Harold Pruitt, the outgoing general manager, had been given the new owner's name, and he had been told to keep it close until Monday. Serena lifted her water glass. She watched the room. Brett Calloway worked the floor like a man who believed every conversation was a stage being prepared for him. He was 34, broad-shouldered, the supervisor at Calloway and Sons Contracting, which was his father's company, and one day he assumed would be his. He had been drinking since 5 o'clock, not enough to slur, only enough to sharpen the part of him that was always looking for a smaller person to stand on. His eyes had landed on Serena twice that evening already, and twice he had looked away because she was alone and quiet, and to a man like Brett, that was the same as being unguarded. When his eyes found Owen Hale near the bar, the welder in the borrowed jacket holding a child's hand, they lit up. "Hale," Brett called across the room loud enough to bend the conversations nearest him. "Hale, come here. There's somebody I want you to meet." Owen turned. His shoulders did the small thing they did. When he heard a tone, he recognized the same tone he had heard in middle school cafeterias and on job site break rooms his entire life, the tone of a man setting up a punchline. "Daddy," Clara whispered. "Stay close, sugar." They walked over. Brett had 2 co-workers at his shoulder, both grinning the grin of men who had been told what was coming. "Folks," Brett announced, raising his voice for the room, now not just the table. "Folks, can I have your attention for 1 second? Just 1 second. I want to do a little something." The jazz quartet did not stop, but the chatter dimmed. Heads turned. A woman near the dessert table set down her champagne flute. "This here," Brett said, hand on Owen's shoulder, "is Owen Hale, welder, single father, salt-of-the-earth American. And I have looked around this room all night, and I have realized that we have a problem. Owen here is single, and there is one other person at this party who is also single, and it would be downright unneighborly of me not to make an introduction." The 2 co-workers were already laughing. Brett lifted his arm and pointed across the ballroom, past the dancers, past the auction tables, past the candlesticks burning low, straight at the woman in charcoal at the corner table by the kitchen door. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brett said, "I give you a match made in heaven. 2 nobodies nobody wants." The laughter went up like a flock of birds. It was not all of the room. It was perhaps a third. The third closest to Brett the third that had been drinking with him, the third that found cruelty funny when it was paid for and catered. But it was enough. It was loud enough that the woman in charcoal flinched the smallest possible flinch, only along the line of her jaw, and looked down into her water glass. A thin man at Brett's shoulder leaned in toward Owen and added, just loud enough to carry, "Hell, Hale, take her home. Let her practice being a stepmom right here. Save you a babysitter." The laughter sharpened. Owen did not move. He felt Clara's hand inside his hand. He felt the small, deliberate squeeze of her fingers. A child's question asked, in the only language she had, "Daddy, what do we do?" He looked down. Her eyes were not wet. That was the thing that almost broke him. 6 years old, and she was already pressing the bear so tight against her chest that the seam along its left ear had begun to give, and still she was not crying. Because somewhere in the short geography of her life, she had figured out that tears did not help when grown men were laughing. He could leave. He could turn around right now, walk Clara back through the lobby, drive home, put her in pajamas, and never tell her what those words had meant. But she had seen him hear them. She had seen a room full of strangers laugh about taking a damaged woman home like a piece of discounted furniture, and she had seen her father stand still while it happened. Whatever he did in the next 30 seconds, she would carry with her. Not the words, the shape of what her father did with his body when other men tried to make him small. He let go of Clara's hand. He bent down very slowly and whispered something into her ear that no one else heard. She gave him back the same small, certain nod she had given him in the truck. Then Owen Hale straightened, walked the length of the ballroom alone, and stopped at the corner table by the kitchen door. Serena Whitfield did not look up. She was holding her water glass with both hands now, as if the glass were the only solid thing in the room. "Ma'am," Owen said quietly enough that only she could hear it. "My name is Owen. That's my daughter Clara. We'd like to sit at your table if you'll have us. Not because of him, because we'd like to." She lifted her eyes. He did not see what most of Charleston had spent 4 years deciding they saw when they looked at her. He saw a woman who had made herself very still the way a deer makes itself still. And he understood the stillness because he had used it himself at funerals, at custody hearings, at the kitchen table, the morning he had read his wife's note for the 3rd time, and realized she was not coming back. Serena gave the smallest possible nod. Owen pulled out the chair to her right. He set it gently, the way a man sets down something he is afraid will break, and he turned to the room. Not to Brett, not yet, but to the room, because the room was the audience Brett had been performing for. And Owen understood that the only way to take the stage from a man like that was to address the people he had been borrowing. "Excuse me," Owen said. The voice he used was the voice he used on job sites, not loud, but pitched in a way the ear had to follow. "I'd like to say one thing. Then I'll leave you to your evening." The jazz quartet, sensing something, slowed. "This woman," Owen said, "doesn't deserve to be turned into a joke by people who have no right to speak her name. I don't know her. Most of you don't either. But I know what it sounds like when grown men decide to be cruel for sport, and I won't sit at any table in this room where that's the entertainment." He turned back. He pulled out the chair beside Serena's for Clara, and Clara, small navy dress. Bare pressed to her ribs, walked the length of the ballroom alone, the way her father had, and climbed into it. The laughter had stopped. Brett Calloway, still standing by the bar with his hand frozen mid-gesture, was no longer the loudest man in the room. He was about to find out what it cost to lose that. The silence held for the length of 3 breaths. It was not the silence of a room that had nothing to say. It was the silence of a room recalculating, of 300 well-dressed people, realizing almost simultaneously that the joke they had laughed at 30 seconds earlier was now sitting at a corner table with a child in a navy dress, and that the man who had told the joke was still standing by the bar with one hand suspended in the air like a politician who had forgotten the rest of his speech. Brett Calloway recovered first. He always did. A man who lived for the room could not afford to let the room slip more than a heartbeat without him. "Well," he called out, his voice landing somewhere between a laugh and a recovery. "Would you look at that? Hale's got himself a date after all. I hope you 2 crazy kids are very happy together." A few of his co-workers laughed. The laughter was thinner now. It did not travel. Owen had already sat down. He was unfolding the napkin on his lap, with the careful, unhurried movement of a man who had decided a long time ago not to be rushed by other men's noise. He looked up only when Brett finished speaking, and even then he took his time. "If that's how you help your co-workers find dates, Brett," Owen said, his voice carrying without rising, "I think I understand now why you don't know how to talk to women. Somebody at a nearby table, an older woman in a pearl gray shawl, let out a single short laugh and immediately covered her mouth with her hand. Brett's jaw worked. "Hale, I was just having a little fun." "I'm not going to debate what fun is with you, Brett. I'm not standing up here giving a lecture. I just don't intend to sit in a room where grown men insult strangers for sport and call it humor. And I don't intend to let my daughter sit there either. So we'll be eating over here, if that's all right with the rest of you." The jazz quartet, which had slowed almost to a stop, played one tentative note, then another. The band leader, a thin, gray-haired man with a trumpet, looked at his bassist, shrugged a single shoulder, and led the group quietly back into something soft and slow that no one could dance to, but that allowed the room to begin breathing again. Conversation resumed at perhaps half its earlier volume. Knives touched plates. A waiter refilled water glasses with the practiced invisibility of his trade. The gala technically continued, but the center of gravity had moved. Everyone in the ballroom knew exactly where Owen Hale and his daughter and the woman in charcoal were sitting, and the tables nearest them had grown unusually attentive to their own salads. Clara was the first to speak at the corner table, which surprised no one more than Clara herself. She had been turning the small white candle in its glass holder, one slow quarter turn at a time, watching the wax tremble. Then, without lifting her eyes, she said, "I'm Clara. I'm 6. I have a teddy bear named Marvin." "Hello, Clara," Serena said. Her voice was lower than Owen had expected, quieter, with a roughness around the edges that did not come from the night air. "I'm Serena. I don't have a teddy bear. I think I'd like one." Clara thought about that for a serious second. "Marvin used to be Daddy's, from when he was little, so he's old." "Old bears are the best kind," Serena said. Owen watched his daughter make the decision to like this woman. It was a visible thing in Clara, a small adjustment in her shoulders, the way she set Marvin down on the seat beside her, instead of clutching him. She had not done that all evening. The waiter brought soup. Clara, who did not eat soup at home, unless it was the kind with the alphabet pasta, ate this soup, because Serena was eating it, and Serena had said, with the conspiratorial seriousness of one adult to another, that the secret was the little drop of cream on top. Owen and Serena talked the way two strangers talk when they have both decided separately to give the evening a chance about the weather, which had been wet, and about the bridge construction on Highway 17, which had been going on so long that local children had begun to believe it was simply where roads went to live. Easy things, things with no edges. After a while, after the soup and the salad, and the small bread rolls that Clara declared fancier than regular bread, Owen said more gently than he had said anything else, "Can I ask you something, Miss Serena? You don't have to answer. I just want to ask it the right way." "Go ahead. You came here alone tonight. You sat at the table closest to the kitchen. Most folks here, they walked past you like they didn't see you, and one of them used your situation as a punchline. I just want to make sure, are you all right? Not in general, just right now." It was not the question she had expected. She had expected sympathy or curiosity, or the slow, patient pity that strangers offered her when they realized who her father had been. She had not expected a man to ask her as plainly as a neighbor might ask about a leaking pipe whether she was all right tonight, this minute in this chair. She set down her spoon. She looked at the candle. "I came to a party in this hotel once," she said. "I was 21. My father was alive. The room looked the same. The chandelier in the lobby was lit. I walked down those stairs in a dress my mother had picked out. And I thought, I am the luckiest girl in Charleston. I really thought that. That exact sentence." Owen did not interrupt. 3 years later, my father was dead. The company was gone. And the people who used to send my mother orchids on her birthday started crossing the street when they saw her. There is a name they gave me in this town. I'm sure you've heard it tonight. I heard it. For 4 years, that name has been the first thing most rooms decide about me. So when a man like the one over there points at me and laughs, Mr. Hale, the truth is, he did not invent anything new. He only said out loud what most of these people have been thinking quietly for a long time. She looked up at him then, and her eyes were dry, because she had taught them as plainly as Clara had taught hers, that there were rooms in which they were not allowed to spend. To answer your question, she said, no, I am not all right, but I am steadier than I was an hour ago, and that is because of the two of you. Owen took a moment with that. He turned his water glass a quarter turn the way Clara had turned the candle. Miss Serena, he said, people who deserve respect don't need to know your past before they decide to treat you well. That's not how it works. That's never how it works. Anyone who needs your resume before they offer you basic decency, they were never going to offer you decency. They were going to offer you a transaction. She closed her eyes for one long second. Clara, who had been listening more closely than either of them, realized slid down from her chair. She walked around the table to Serena's side, and there was nothing solemn or grown-up about the walk. She went the way a 6-year-old goes anywhere, a little crooked, the bear bumping against her hip. She reached into the small embroidered pocket of her navy dress and took out a peppermint candy, half unwrapped, slightly warm from being carried all evening. She laid it on the white tablecloth in front of Serena. I still have my dad. Clara said, so that's enough. You can have this one. I have one more in my other pocket for emergencies. Serena looked at the peppermint. She looked at Clara. She did not say anything for a long moment, because she could not. Then very carefully, she picked up the candy and closed her hand around it, as if it were made of something more fragile than sugar. Thank you, Clara, she said. I will keep it safe. You can eat it if you want. I might, but not yet. Clara climbed back into her chair, satisfied, and Marvin the bear was returned to his honorary position beside her plate. Serena slid the peppermint with some ceremony into the small inner pocket of her charcoal dress. Owen did not look at Serena's face because he understood that she needed a moment that was not being witnessed. He looked instead at his daughter and felt for the first time all evening that they hadn't made a mistake by coming. Brett Calloway was still drinking. He had moved from the bar to a high-top table with two of his co-workers, and the angle of his shoulders had grown tighter as the evening went on. He had told a second joke and gotten only half a laugh. He had told a third about the bridge construction on Highway 17 and gotten almost nothing, because Owen Hale had already said something about Highway 17 at his table, and people had liked it better. The room had a new center of gravity. Brett could feel it the way a man feels a draft in a house he thought was sealed. Around 9:15, he set down his glass, told his co-workers to watch this, and walked across the ballroom toward the corner table. He came up behind Clara's chair, and Owen's whole body registered him before his eyes did. Hale, Brett said loud again, now loud enough to gather an audience. I want to ask you something, man to man. Owen set down his fork. Go ahead. If you had any other option in this room tonight, any other table, any other woman, any other version of how this evening could have gone, would you still be sitting here with this lady? It was a clean trap. Owen could feel its teeth. Yes would sound like pity. No would sound like cowardice. Either answer in front of 300 people would let Brett walk back to his table with the room in his pocket again. Owen looked at Clara. Clara was looking up at him with the expression she wore when she was trying very hard to understand something that the adults around her clearly understood. He looked at Serena. Serena had folded her hands in her lap. She was preparing, he realized, to stand up and leave, to spare him, to take the cost of the evening onto herself, the way she had been quietly taking the cost of being herself in this town for 4 years. That was the thing that decided it. Owen pushed his chair back and stood. Brett, he said, and his voice was steadier than it had been all night. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to answer the real one because the one you asked is dishonest, and I think you know that. A few heads at neighboring tables turned. The jazz quartet, which had begun something faster, eased down again into the slow piece, the way musicians do when they sense the room rearranging itself. "You're asking if I'd be sitting here if I had a better option," Owen said. "The honest answer is yes. I'd be sitting at any table in any room where someone was being insulted for no reason, because I cannot sit one table over and listen to it. That's not me being a hero, Brett. That's just me not being able to chew my food while it's happening." Brett's mouth tightened. "So you think you're better than the rest of us?" "No, sir. I don't." "That's exactly what it sounds like. I'm not trying to be better than anybody in this room. I'm just trying not to become the kind of man my daughter would be ashamed to call her father." The sentence landed so cleanly that even Brett's two co-workers at the high top set down their drinks. Brett's face had gone the color of bricks. He took half a step backward, looking for the exit, and discovered without quite meaning to discover it, that the exit had grown further away, that the ballroom had quietly closed around him, not by any movement he could name, only by 300 faces having turned to face the same direction. He was groping visibly for the next move, the next joke, the recovery that would put the room back in his hand. But Owen had not raised his voice. Owen had not insulted him. Owen had simply said a true sentence about himself, and the room, recognizing it as true, had let it stand. The older woman in the pearl gray shawl stood up at her own table very slowly and began to clap. It was a small sound. It did not catch fire. But 2 tables over, a younger man in a navy suit joined her, and then a middle-aged couple near the auction display, and then perhaps a dozen others scattered around the ballroom. Not the whole room, not yet, but enough that Brett, standing in the middle of the floor, understood with a sick clarity that the audience he had built his whole adult life on borrowing had just been borrowed back. Clara, who had been watching with her enormous eyes, slid down from her chair. She walked in her navy dress around the table to where her father stood. She put one small hand on Owen's pant leg, and then she let go, and walked the remaining 4 steps until she was standing directly between her father and Brett Calloway, looking up at the larger man with a face that had nothing in it but honesty. "My daddy says," Clara said, and her voice was small, and it shook a little at the start, and it carried, because the whole room had gone quiet enough to let it. "My daddy says real nice grown-ups don't make somebody cry, and then say it was a joke. That's just being mean with extra steps." The last words came out a little tangled. Marvin the bear was clutched against her chest again. She turned then away from Brett, away from the man who had been 10 seconds earlier the loudest person in the room, and walked to Serena's chair. She held out her small, free hand, palm up. "If nobody else wants to sit with you," Clara said, "my daddy will. And me too." The jazz quartet stopped playing, not because anyone had told them to. The trumpet player simply lowered his horn, and the bassist let his hand fall away from the strings, and the room, 300 people, 3 crystal chandeliers, 1 century-old hotel, held perfectly still. Serena Whitfield reached out and took the child's hand, and it was at exactly that moment, from the side door of the ballroom, that Harold Pruitt, silver-haired, dark-suited, the outgoing general manager of Hargrove Manor, stepped through the curtain with a look on his face that suggested he had been searching the entire hotel for someone, and had just with great relief found her. Harold Pruitt crossed the ballroom the way a man crosses a room when the news he carries is more important than his dignity. He did not glance at the candles, or the crystal, or the crowd. He walked straight to the corner table by the kitchen door, and he stopped 2 paces short of it, and he gave a small bow of the head that nobody in Charleston had seen Harold Pruitt give to anyone in 26 years of running this hotel. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I am terribly sorry to interrupt. Your board car has arrived for the 10 o'clock briefing at the Magnolia office. The driver asked if you would like him to wait in the lobby or return at a later hour." His voice was not loud. He had spent his career not being loud. But the room had gone quiet enough after Clara's small, clear sentence that his words traveled to every wall. Miss Whitfield. The name moved through the ballroom the way a stone moves through still water. It reached the bar first, where Brett Calloway's two co-workers slowly simultaneously set down their glasses. It reached the dessert table, where a woman who had laughed earlier in the evening lifted her hand to her throat. It reached the older woman in the pearl gray shawl, who closed her eyes for one long second and let out a breath she had clearly been holding without knowing it. It reached Brett last. He was still standing where Clara had left him. The color that had risen in his face during Owen's last sentence was now draining out of it, leaving the kind of gray that belongs to men who have just understood something they cannot ununderstand. His mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. Owen, who had not yet sat back down, did not look at him. Owen was looking at Serena. She was still holding Clara's small hand. She did not stand up suddenly. She did not announce herself. She lifted her chin very slightly, and she said to Harold in the same low, even voice she had used all evening, "Thank you, Harold. Please ask the driver to wait. The briefing can begin at 10:15. There is something I would like to say in this room first." "Yes, Miss Whitfield." He stepped back. He did not leave. He stood at a respectful distance with his hands folded in front of him, the way a butler stands in a film about an old house, and waited. Serena turned to Clara. "Sweetheart, would you mind sitting with your father for a minute? I have to talk to the room." Clara climbed up into Owen's lap, not her own chair, his lap, and Owen wrapped one arm around her without taking his eyes off Serena. Serena set both hands on the table. She used them to push herself up. The right side, the rain, and the headlights had taken from her 4 years earlier, took an extra half-second to obey the way it always did. But she had learned long ago to let her body have that half-second without apologizing for it. She did not walk to the center of the room. She walked only as far as the edge of her own table 3 steps, and then she turned to face the ballroom. "My name," she said, "is Serena Whitfield. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the legal entity that owns this hotel is Whitfield Hospitality Group, of which I am the principal. The acquisition closed quietly through a Delaware holding company. Most of you in this room did not know. That was on purpose. I wanted for one evening to sit in this building the way an ordinary guest sits in a building and watch the way people behave when they believe nobody important is watching." The room held still. "I'd like to be clear about something. I did not come here to catch anyone. I am not a teacher. I am not a judge. I came because when I was 21 years old, I came to a party in this same room with my father, and I have not until tonight been back inside this building as anything other than an employee folding sheets in the basement laundry. So I came to sit by the kitchen door, and I came to be quiet, and I came to see what Charleston had become while my back was turned." Her eyes moved across the room. They did not seek out Brett. They did not need to. "And I learned something tonight that I want every person in this room to hear, because I do not believe most of you are cruel people. I believe most of you are people who have learned over the last few years to look at someone like me and decide quickly. Daughter of the man whose company collapsed, the girl who limps now, the one who used to be somebody. I have heard these sentences in this town for 4 years. Most of you have said one of them. Some of you said one of them tonight, before you knew who I was. And that is exactly the point I want to make." She lifted one hand, not high, only as high as her shoulder. "The man who pointed at me from across this room 2 hours ago did not know who I was. The people who laughed did not know who I was. That is precisely why what they did tonight matters. They allowed themselves to be cruel because they had decided in advance that I was nobody. And here is the thing I want every one of you to understand before you leave this hotel tonight." Her voice did not rise. It did the opposite. It quieted. The room leaned in to catch it. Elegance does not live in chandeliers. It does not live in the price of the wine on your table, or the cut of the jacket on your shoulders. It lives in how each of you, on any given night, choose to treat the people who cannot do anything for you. Tonight in this room, almost nobody knew I could do anything for them. And almost nobody chose to be kind anyway. The older woman in the pearl gray shawl was openly crying now. She was not the only one. 2 people in this room did. A welder named Owen Hale, who walked across this ballroom alone because he did not want his daughter to grow up believing that grown men are allowed to be cruel for sport. And a 6-year-old girl named Clara, who gave me a peppermint candy out of her pocket because she has more, and she thought I had less, and that was the entire calculation. That was elegance. That was the only thing in this building tonight that deserved the word. She turned her head finally toward Brett. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesture. She simply looked at him across 40 feet of polished floor. I know you do not know me, Mr. Calloway. That is exactly why what you did tonight was the thing it was. You permitted yourself to be cruel because you had decided in advance that I was no one. You are going to have a hard week. I want you to understand that the hard week is not because you insulted a wealthy woman. It is because you insulted a stranger in a corner who had nothing to offer you, and you did it for the entertainment of a room. If I were still the laundry attendant in the basement of this hotel, what you did would be exactly as wrong. The only thing my name changes is whether there are consequences. Brett's voice when it came was much smaller than it had been all evening. Miss Whitfield, it was a joke. I never meant a joke. Serena said, is only a joke when the person it is aimed at can laugh too. Anything else is a performance, and the audience for that performance was every person in this room who chose to laugh with you. I am not interested tonight in punishing the audience. I am interested in making sure the performance stops. She turned back to Harold Pruitt. Harold, first thing tomorrow morning, please pull the file on Calloway & Sons contracting. They have an active service agreement with the hotel for exterior masonry. I would like that agreement reviewed and terminated by the end of the business day, with the standard 30-day courtesy. Please also pull the guest list from tonight and forward to my office a draft conduct policy for every event held under the Whitfield Hospitality name going forward. We are going to be very specific about what this company will and will not host. Yes, Miss Whitfield. She turned back to the room one final time. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. The bar will remain open. The auction will continue. Mr. Calloway, I will need you to leave the building. Not because of what you said about me, because of what you said about a child's father in front of the child. 2 of the hotel's security staff, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room since Harold's entrance, stepped forward. They did not touch Brett. They did not need to. They stood on either side of him, the way ushers stand beside a man who has overstayed a wedding, and waited. Brett looked for one last second around the room he had been performing for his entire adult life, the room he had borrowed and borrowed and borrowed from and found in 300 faces, not a single pair of eyes that would meet his. He walked out alone. The 2 co-workers at the high top did not follow him. They stayed exactly where they were, staring into their drinks, having understood perhaps for the first time in their working lives that the man they had been laughing with was a man worth nothing without the laughter. The jazz quartet, after a long, uncertain second, began again. It was a slow piece. Nobody danced. Serena turned around and walked the 3 steps back to the corner table. The half-second hitch in her right side was this time more visible than it had been all evening, because she had used herself up. Owen saw it. He did not look away from it. He stood as she approached and pulled her chair out for her, the way a man pulls out a chair for someone he respects, not someone he pities. She sat down. Clara, still in Owen's lap, was studying Serena's face. "Miss Serena," she whispered, "are you okay?" Serena did not answer with words at first. She lowered herself very slowly until her face was level with Clara's. Her right knee did not love this. Her face did not show that her right knee did not love this. "Clara," she said, "thank you." "For what?" "For the candy. And for what you said. And for sitting next to me when nobody else would." Clara thought about that. Then, with the slow, careful seriousness of someone making a real decision, she reached again into the pocket of her navy dress. The other pocket, the one with the emergency peppermint, and she took out the second candy and held it out on her open palm. "You can have this one too," Clara said. "You might need two." Serena closed her hand around the second peppermint. She did not put it in her pocket this time. She held it instead in her closed fist all the way through the 10:15 briefing, and she was still holding it when the driver dropped her off at her apartment a little after midnight, and she set it finally on her kitchen counter beside the first 1-2 small white pieces of evidence that the evening had been real. The weeks that followed did not look from the outside like the kind of thing that follows a night like that. There was no press release. There was no interview. There were instead 3 quiet things. The first was that the service agreement between Hargrove Manor and Callaway and Sons Contracting was terminated by close of business the next day, exactly as Serena had instructed, with the standard 30-day courtesy, and not 1 day more. 2 other hotels in the Whitfield portfolio, hearing what had happened, terminated their own contracts within the week. Brett's father, who was a different kind of man from his son, and who had built the company from a single truck in 1984, sat his son down in the office one morning and told him he would be running the warehouse from now on, and that he would not be representing the company at any client function for the foreseeable future, and that this was not a punishment, but a mercy, because the alternative would have ended much worse. The second was that Owen Hale received a phone call 2 weeks after the gala from Serena herself. She would like to meet him for coffee, she said. Not for an interview, just for coffee. She had a project she wanted to describe to him, and she wanted to describe it in person. The third was that Serena Whitfield, in those same 2 weeks, began to sketch first on a legal pad, then on architectural paper, then in formal proposal form, what she would later call the second key program. The idea was small in its mechanics and large in its meaning. Whitfield Hospitality would purchase quietly a number of distressed homes near each of its hotel's homes. The banks had taken back homes whose owners had walked away, homes the city had been thinking about condemning. The homes would be repaired by a small crew under a single technical lead, and then the homes would be handed one at a time with no ceremony and no signage to single parents and hospitality workers in the middle of the worst year of their lives. There would be no plaque on any of the houses. There would be no press release. There would only be a single key handed across a kitchen counter and the words, "Welcome home." For the technical lead of the first crew, Serena did not advertise the position. She called Owen Hale. "I don't know how to talk in front of a board, Miss Serena," he said when she described it to him over coffee at a small diner 3 blocks from the hotel. "I'm not hiring you to talk in front of a board, Mr. Hale." "Then what are you hiring me for?" "I'm hiring you because I need someone who will know which roof in our portfolio is going to leak before the rain comes. I am hiring you because the woman who is going to walk into the first of these houses cannot afford for the man who fixed it to have been guessing. And I am hiring you, if I am being entirely honest, because I would like to work with people who already know what elegance is, and there are not very many of you." Owen looked at his coffee for a long time. "Miss Serena," he said finally, "I'd be honored." He started the following Monday. The first house was on a side street called Magnolia Row, 4 blocks from a Whitfield hotel on the edge of North Charleston. It had a sagging porch, a roof Owen had to strip down to the rafters, and a kitchen window that looked out over a small magnolia tree, which had survived everything the previous owners had done to it. The woman moving in was named Patrice Goodwin. She worked the night shift at Roper Hospital, 2 boys at home, 1-9, 1-4, and a husband who had left in February without forwarding an address. Owen had heard about her from a man at his old welding shop whose sister knew Patrice from church. Owen had passed the name to Serena. Serena had passed it to her housing committee. And 4 months after the night at Hargrove Manor, on a soft Saturday afternoon in early spring, Patrice Goodwin stood on the sidewalk of Magnolia Row, holding a single key in a hand that was shaking only slightly. Owen, Serena, and Clara stood together on the porch. Owen had on his work jacket and clean jeans. Serena had on a charcoal coat, the color of the dress she had worn that night, and a steel watch on her left wrist and the same low knot in her hair. Clara was wearing the navy dress with the white collar. She had outgrown it slightly, at the cuffs since November, and her father had let down the sleeves a 1/4 inch the night before. The magnolia tree was just beginning to bud. Patrice walked up the path slowly. Her older son was carrying a cardboard box. Her younger son was carrying a stuffed rabbit. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at the 3 of them, and she did not say anything for a long second, because she could not. "Welcome home, Mrs. Goodwin," Serena said. Patrice came up the steps. She fitted the key into the lock the way a person fits a key into the first lock of their own life, and she turned it, and the door of the house she could now lawfully call hers opened in front of her. Her older boy went in first. Her younger boy followed the rabbit, dragging by one ear. Patrice stood on the threshold and reached behind her without looking, and Serena, understanding, took her hand for the length of one breath and let it go. Patrice went inside. The door closed gently behind them. Owen, Serena, and Clara stayed on the porch. Clara was looking up at Serena. Serena was looking at the door. Owen was watching the magnolia tree. After a moment, Serena reached into her coat pocket, the small inner one, and took out a peppermint candy. The wrapper was creased and slightly yellowed. The cellophane softened from 4 months of being carried. She held it on her open palm, the way Clara had held it that night in the ballroom of Hargrove Manor. "You kept it," Clara said. "I kept it. All this time. All this time." Clara reached up and placed her small hand over Serena's and closed Serena's fingers gently back around the candy. "You should keep it," Clara said, "for the next house." Serena looked down at the small hand on hers, and at the soft afternoon light coming through the magnolia branches, and at the door behind which a woman who had not slept through a night in 11 months was for the first time walking through rooms that belonged to her. She slid the peppermint back into her pocket. The most precious thing in the end was not kindness that had been repaid. It was kindness offered to a stranger in a corner before anyone in the room had any way of knowing what she might one day have to give. The magnolia tree shifted in the breeze. Inside the house, somewhere down a hallway, a child laughed for the first time that spring.